Yo guys, welcome back, and today we are looking at Broadway grosses, so let's get into it. Up first, we have Juliet, which went from 94.23 to 92.64, and 844K to 891K. Two solid weeks for Juliet, but again, I fear that with how much they need to be giving back in terms of royalties, and it is, a show that, does require them to give money to the artist as it is a jukebox musical, this is verging on sort of concerning. I think Juliet preferably stays at 950,000 plus. So again, is it in any danger of closing anytime soon? No, but I think we should be taking a closer look at Juliet because based on these numbers, it is not doing terrible and it's not going to close in the next month. It's not in that situation. But we have seen a decrease in grosses since April, which is the last time when it made $1 million. And you'll notice that even in its first year, it fell off pretty considerably early, which is very concerning if you're an Juliet producer, despite recouping their investment and making back their money, and now they're making profit. Again, I still think that this is a bit of an odd number, not an odd number, but it's a number that, you don't want to see as much, basically. If it starts doing sevens and sixes, then we can get super concerned. I don't see that happening. I think as long as it stays at 844,000, 891,000, it'll do absolutely fine and it'll be absolutely okay. Back to the Future went from 96% to 88%, and 1,095,536 to 1,049,848. I'm going to say it, Back to the Future, it could close by the end of this year. I just didn't think it was going to happen, but I think it might. At this point, it should be making 1,200,000, 1,300,000 after a lackluster spring, and the fact that it hasn't done that is very concerning. These months are when it's meant to make the most amount of money, and a big fall dump is going to come in September and in October. I think the chances of it ending by the end of the year are not extremely high, but I do think after seeing the numbers over the past 2 weeks, I do think that Back to the Future is a show that you need to keep an eye out for, and that I think producers and investors should be, and probably are, concerned with why it's not doing so well. I think this was basically a show that had huge momentum in its first couple of months, and then it just dropped off, and it never was able to regain that momentum. And I think that's partially because of an oversaturation of movie musicals, so forth, and it being one of the busiest seasons. It could do better in the fall, and if it makes it to next year, you might see an increase, but the first year is typically when shows do the best, and Back to the Future, it's not doing so hot, and it's just barely getting by, and it's very concerning. I also think that people might go and see it. My opinion is that people go and see it and they say, that's not the greatest show I've ever seen. And I think that it might come down to quality than anything else, because I think the marketing, the brand, I think it's very strong. So if those two things aren't selling it enough, it has to be one other thing, and that's the content of the show. And I think that is what is happening with Back to the Future. Cabaret went from 98% to 95%, and 1,566,476 to 1,609,557. Hadestown went from 100.31 to 100.15, and 803K to 825K. These are still solid, good numbers for Hadestown. As long as Hadestown has an 8 in front of it, it's fine. And you know what? I think as long as it has an 8 or a 7, it's fine. I think 7 is less desirable, and I think if it's hitting 750 or lower, then I think that's when we have to get concerned. But for right now, Hadestown, I think, will have a very good summer. Hamilton went from 101.11 to 100.59, and 1,926,140 to 1,922,308. Hell's Kitchen continues to be a behemoth, selling out and going from 1,526,852 to 1,687,326. Illinois is doing okay. It's ending in a couple of weeks, so it doesn't matter at this point, and I've extensively covered why I don't think it's done so hot. But it went from 92% to 81%, and 699K to 745K, and they had 8 performances as opposed to their regular 7. A solid week for Illinois at 745K, but again, it has very much underwhelmed. I wouldn't say disappointed or flopped, but I think it definitely, the producers were maybe hoping for better results. And I think because of how popular the album is, and how critically acclaimed it was, it is a bit of a disappointing box office return. But again, I think it is definitely a much more niche kind of musical. Moulin Rouge is in major trouble, going from 96% to 93% and 951K last week to this week's 966K. A terrible time for Moulin Rouge. I know Aaron Tveit is coming back, and that will definitely boost the box office, but it is very clear that this show is losing steam. It's on its last legs, and this is just the natural course of shows' life. They start to lose steam and then they close. That's the circle of theater life. And Moulin Rouge cannot sustain under $1 million. It just can't. It's too expensive. There's too many royalties. It just cannot survive, and it is doing very poorly. And I think that it has done well enough in the first half of this year that it's not going to close at the end of this year. But I think we are in the final years of this show, and I think no one can question that. Six went from 97% to 95%, and 903K to 884K. Stereophonic sold out and went from 970K to 983K. And with how well they've done in terms of plays don't do this well. They don't even make it to 900,000. I very much believe Stereophonic will extend even beyond January, because it has become a smash hit and really become the kind of breakout hit that you would see for musicals and not for a play. Suffs went from 93% to 94% and 701K to 826K. Now, this is very good numbers for Suffs, and if Suffs can maintain 800 plus, they are set. They can make it to the end of the year and beyond. But again, I think the fall is going to take the wind out of them, and I think they will close at the end of this year. But they have done a lot better, financially speaking, than I would have thought, and they have had a lot of 8s and 9s in their box office weeks than 7s and 6s. So I think as long as it can maintain that, it will be fine. But again, it's a very risky property going into the fall, because it's like one of the few original musicals, and it is very political. The Great Gatsby went from 97.91 to 97.90, and 1,129,274 to 1,237,083. So obviously, many people were predicting this would be a flop, and it wasn't, me included. I was wrong, I admit it. But why does The Great Gatsby has turned into this mega hit, panned by critics, shut out by the Tonys, and is one of the best performing new musicals this season? Well, one, it's because The Great Gatsby is a brand. It's a book that universally is known. Old people like it, couples like it, Gen Z people like it, millennials like it, conservatives, Republicans. It covers all of the bases. And it is, as Jeremy Jordan says, a very rare instance of a classical Broadway show with classical Broadway spectacle, and clearly there is a hunger for that kind of show, as shown by The Great Gatsby's numbers. I also think Eva Noblezada and Jeremy Jordan has invested a lot of fans that wouldn't be had it not been for their names. And it goes to show that those two names, which we didn't think were big names, although I've always said Jordan could sell tickets, these two can push shows, not extensively the way Hugh Jackman or Daniel Radcliffe, but they can push shows in a significant way, as seen by The Great Gatsby box office. The Notebook went from 95% to 92%, and 645K to 672K. Definitely, this show is going to close either by Labor Day or the end of the year. I think because it is a little less expensive, it could close at the end of the year, but they've lost so much money and they've done such disappointing box office. And The Notebook was the show that everyone thought was a slam dunk, gonna run for many years, me included, and it started off so well, but I think the poor critical reception and audience reception and lack of Tony noms and wins has led to The Notebook's downfall, and I personally think it's one of the worst shows currently running on the Broadway. But yeah, definitely it is over. These are not sustainable numbers. I mean, Shucked was doing better than The Notebook. Shucked. Let that sink in. The Outsiders went from 102% to 102%, and 1,375,672 to 1,390,233. And while people might be like, well, The Outsiders is such a big brand show, it should have a 5, it should have a 6, The Outsiders is doing what typical Best Musical Winners box office does, and a return to normalcy, whereas Akimbo or Strange Loop never even reached 900,000 consistently. So I am very happy that that a Best Musical Winner is doing regular Best Musical Winner numbers pre-COVID. And then The Wiz went from 95% to 92%, and 1,158,421 to 1,240,166, and Water for Elephants went from 94% to 84%, and 861K to 928K. I definitely think Water for Elephants is closing at the end of the year. Their weekly operating costs are like $980,000, and these 2 weeks were way below. It needs to be making $1 million, period. Now, it has done very well in April and May, but leading up to the Tonys, but it clearly has lost that momentum. And I think this show, like we all predicted from the beginning, was not meant to last. If I had to choose, I'd say Water for Elephants would close first because it is more expensive, but technically Water for Elephants has made more money than The Notebook, so I could see Water for Elephants sticking it out. But point is, this time next year, both of these shows closed, and that is pretty much a fact. So anyways, guys, let me know what you think about the grosses down below. Like, subscribe, and comment, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.